I stood outside the FDA inspection room, my hands shaking as I held the flash drive containing evidence that could save thousands of lives or destroy my career forever. Through the glass window, I watched my incompetent replacement charm the inspectors while they examined contaminated surgical implants he'd falsely certified as sterile. In 30 minutes, they'd approved devices that could kill patients, and I was the only one who could stop it. My name is Jake Thompson, and at 29, I thought I had life figured out. 5 years working as a lab technician at MedTech Solutions had taught me one thing. When you're testing medical devices that go inside people's bodies, there's no room for shortcuts. Every morning, I'd arrive at the facility an hour early, not because my boss demanded it, but because I couldn't sleep, knowing that somewhere a surgeon might be holding an implant I'd certified as safe. The routine never got old. Check the overnight sterilization cycles first, review every contamination test result, flag anything that looked even slightly questionable for re-sterilization. My colleagues used to joke that I was obsessive, but they didn't understand what kept me awake at night. One contaminated hip implant could mean a grandmother never walks again. One bacteria-laden surgical device could turn a routine procedure into a death sentence. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Coffee in hand, I pulled up the test results for our latest batch of hip implants. The numbers made my stomach drop. Bacterial readings were way above acceptable levels, not even close to passing. I immediately flagged the entire batch for re-sterilization, just like protocol demanded. Then Richard Sterling called me into his office. Sterling had been my boss for 3 years, and I'd never seen him look this uncomfortable. He fidgeted with his pen, avoided eye contact, and kept clearing his throat like he was about to deliver bad news to a terminal patient. Jake, we need to talk about some changes happening in the department. Changes. In corporate speak, that word usually meant someone was about to get screwed. Due to budget restructuring, we're eliminating your position, he said, still not looking at me directly. But don't worry, we found a highly qualified replacement who can handle your responsibilities. 5 years of perfect performance reviews, and they were tossing me out like yesterday's lab samples. The replacement turned out to be Derek Manning, Sterling's old fraternity brother from college. Derek had been working in pharmaceutical sales and was looking for a change. Sales, not laboratory work, not quality control. Sales. During the handover process, everything became crystal clear. Derek didn't understand the first thing about sterile manufacturing protocols. When I showed him the contamination readings on the hip implants, he waved them off as margin of error stuff. He suggested we streamline the process by reducing testing frequency. When I tried to explain that our work was literally life and death, he actually laughed. Patients build immunity anyway, he said, with the confidence of someone who'd never seen an infected surgical site. But here's where things got really interesting. Sterling mentioned that a major FDA inspection was scheduled for the next day. The company was seeking approval for their largest contract ever, 50,000 surgical implants for a hospital network. Derek had already begun what he called fast-tracking batches that I knew hadn't been properly sterilized. The math was simple and terrifying. 50,000 potentially contaminated devices, thousands of patients, dozens of hospitals across multiple states. My last day at MedTech Solutions ended with me hiding in the supply closet, secretly recording Derek as he instructed other lab technicians to massage the numbers on contamination reports. He told them to hide any questionable test results from the FDA inspectors, not fix the problems, hide them. That night, I sat in my car in the company parking lot, staring at my phone. I had Derek's recorded instructions, photos of the falsified reports, and documentation of every contaminated batch he'd approved, evidence that could save thousands of lives or destroy what was left of my career forever. The FDA inspection was happening in 12 hours, and Derek would be the one presenting our clean results to the federal investigators. But I knew something he didn't know I knew, and that knowledge was about to put me in an impossible position. I thought the ethics hotline would save me. You know, that number they post in break rooms with bold letters promising anonymous reporting and protection for whistleblowers. What a joke. The woman on the other end listened patiently as I explained Derek's falsified reports and the contaminated implants heading for FDA approval. She asked for my name, employee ID, and department. Anonymous, my ass. 2 hours later, Sterling called. Derek had already painted me as a disgruntled former employee, trying to sabotage the inspection out of spite. HR scheduled a meeting where they basically told me that any interference with company operations could result in legal action for corporate sabotage. They waved around my non-disclosure agreement like it was some kind of magical shield protecting them from the truth. But here's the thing about knowing people might die because of your silence. It eats at you differently than regular guilt. This wasn't about hurt feelings or your wounded pride. This was about bacteria multiplying in surgical sites, infections spreading through bloodstreams, families getting phone calls no one should ever receive. My building access card still worked. Corporate efficiency at its finest, right? They could fire me in 5 minutes, but couldn't manage to revoke my security clearance for 3 days. That evening, I used their oversight to gather the evidence they thought they'd buried. The contaminated test results Derek had hidden, the sterilization cycle records showing incomplete processes, maintenance logs where he'd instructed staff to calibrate testing equipment to show false negative results for bacterial contamination. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Derek wasn't just cutting corners. He was systematically falsifying every safety measure we had in place. Temperature logs altered, chemical concentrations diluted to save money, time cycles shortened to increase throughput. It was like watching someone disarm every smoke detector in a burning building. Then there was the shipping manifest. Over 15,000 implants had already been certified and shipped to medical facilities across 3 states. Contamination levels on those devices were 3 times higher than safety limits allowed. Hospitals were preparing to use these things in surgeries scheduled for the weeks following FDA approval, knee replacements for active retirees, hip surgeries for arthritis patients, spinal implants for accident victims trying to walk again. Sarah didn't believe me at first. My girlfriend had seen me obsess over work before, and she thought I was spiraling because of the job loss. But when I showed her the contamination data, her face went pale. As a nurse at Regional Medical Center, she understood exactly what those numbers meant. Post-surgical infections, sepsis, multiple organ failure, death. My hospital is on this list, she whispered, scrolling through the delivery schedule on my laptop screen. We're supposed to get 2,000 units next month. That's when the legal threats started escalating. Sterling and MedTech's legal team showed up at my apartment with a cease and desist order that looked like it weighed 5 pounds. They knew about my after-hours building access. They'd seen me copying files and gathering evidence. The lawyer, some guy in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, explained very slowly that any attempt to contact the FDA would result in criminal charges that would destroy my career and bankrupt me for life. Corporate espionage, they called it, trespassing, breach of fiduciary duty, industrial sabotage. They had enough legal ammunition to bury me in court proceedings until I was collecting Social Security. The lawsuit would follow me to any future employer. Background checks would show pending litigation. No medical device company would touch me with a 10-foot sterilization pole. But staying silent meant something else entirely. It meant reading obituaries and wondering if I could have prevented them. It meant watching news reports about mysterious post-surgical infections and knowing exactly what caused them. It meant carrying the weight of thousands of preventable deaths for the rest of my life. Makes sense why people choose the easier path, right? Keep quiet, protect yourself, hope someone else solves the problem. Except there wasn't anyone else. The FDA inspectors were walking into a carefully orchestrated show. Derek would present his falsified documentation, with the confidence of a used car salesman. Sterling would charm them with corporate hospitality and impressive facility tours. The contaminated evidence would stay hidden until after approval, when it would be too late to matter. Well, the moral mathematics were pretty straightforward. Personal financial ruin versus mass casualties, career destruction versus preventing a medical catastrophe that could dwarf previous device recalls. The choice seemed obvious, but obvious and easy aren't the same thing. I spent that night researching federal whistleblower protections, reading case studies of other people who'd tried to expose corporate negligence. The successful ones usually had better evidence, more internal support, and legal teams backing their play. The unsuccessful ones got crushed by corporate legal machines and ended up driving trucks or stocking shelves while their former employers continued business as usual. Then there was the practical problem of actually getting the information to the FDA without violating the cease and desist order. Direct contact was out. Email would leave digital fingerprints. Phone calls could be traced. Anonymous tips might get ignored, especially if Derek had already poisoned the well by claiming I was a saboteur. But the inspection was happening, whether I acted or not. The FDA team would be walking through our facility, examining our processes, reviewing our documentation. They'd see whatever Derek wanted them to see, unless something forced them to look deeper. Sarah found me staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, running through scenarios in my head. "You're going to do it anyway," she said. Not a question, a statement. She was right. The legal threats, the financial risks, the career suicide, none of it really mattered once you accepted that people would die if you stayed quiet. The only question left was how to make sure the FDA discovered the truth without getting myself arrested in the process. The inspection started at 9 a.m. Derek would be leading the federal officials through our supposedly pristine facility, showing off our rigorous quality control measures while hiding contaminated batches in storage areas the inspectors wouldn't normally visit, unless someone gave them a reason to expand their search. And the weird part is, I wasn't scared anymore. Terrified about the consequences, sure, but not scared about the decision itself. Sometimes doing the right thing feels impossible until it becomes inevitable. The flash drive in my pocket contained everything: test results, shipping manifests, maintenance logs, recorded conversations, enough evidence to shut down the approval process and save thousands of lives, or enough to destroy my future completely. In 6 hours, I'd find out which one it would be. Standing outside that inspection room, watching Derek charm federal officials with contaminated evidence, I realized something important about desperate situations. Your hands stop shaking once you accept there's no going back. The original plan seemed simple enough. Sneak the evidence into areas where FDA inspectors would naturally discover it during their facility tour. Plant the flash drive near testing equipment. Leave contamination reports where they'd find them accidentally. Let the truth reveal itself without my fingerprints all over it. Derek had anticipated exactly that move. Walking through the building that morning, I watched him orchestrate the most elaborate cover-up I'd ever seen. The contaminated batches had vanished overnight, replaced with properly sterilized control samples. Falsified documentation sat in neat folders where real test results should have been. Even the testing equipment had been recalibrated to hide any traces of the manipulation I'd discovered. The FDA inspectors were getting the full show. Derek's sales background made him perfect for this kind of performance. He guided them through our state-of-the-art facility with the confidence of someone selling beachfront property in Arizona. They examined his hand-picked samples, reviewed his carefully curated paperwork, and nodded approvingly at his explanations of our rigorous safety protocols. Meanwhile, I stood in the hallway like some kind of corporate ghost, holding evidence that could stop this charade in 30 minutes or less. The legal threats felt very real in that moment. Sterling and the company lawyers had made their position crystal clear. One word to the FDA inspectors, and I'd face criminal charges for corporate espionage, trespassing, and industrial sabotage. They dragged me through courts until I was bankrupt and unemployable. Background checks would show pending litigation for the rest of my career. But watching Derek explain sterilization protocols he didn't understand, investigators who could approve 50,000 contaminated devices, changed something fundamental in my thinking. The legal consequences suddenly seemed abstract compared to the surgical complications those devices would cause. Post-surgical infections don't care about your financial situation. Then Derek made his first mistake. One of the FDA inspectors asked a basic technical question about autoclave temperature cycles. Derek's answer was complete nonsense. Pure sales speak wrapped around scientific terms he'd obviously memorized without understanding. The inspector looked confused, but didn't push back immediately. That's when I realized the inspectors weren't getting the information they needed to make an informed decision. They were regulatory experts, not medical device technicians. They relied on company personnel to explain technical processes honestly and accurately. Derek was feeding them garbage, and they didn't have enough background knowledge to recognize it. The contaminated batches were probably hidden somewhere in the building. The real test results existed somewhere in Derek's files. The evidence of his systematic falsification was still accessible if someone knew where to look. But the inspectors would only examine what Derek showed them during the standard tour. Sterling appeared in the hallway next to me, probably making sure I didn't try anything stupid. Jake, you should leave the building now. This doesn't concern you anymore. Actually, it concerned me more than anything ever had. The moment of decision wasn't dramatic or cinematic. No inspiring music or slow motion sequences. Just me walking into that inspection room, interrupting Derek's presentation, and placing my flash drive on the conference table in front of 3 very surprised federal officials. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I'm Jake Thompson, the former quality control technician for this facility. I have evidence that the devices you're examining have been falsely certified as sterile. The actual contamination levels exceed safety limits by 300%. Sterling immediately started yelling about trespassing and corporate espionage. Derek went pale and began stammering about disgruntled employees and sabotage attempts. Security was probably already on their way. But something interesting happened. The lead FDA inspector held up his hand for silence and asked me a simple question. "What kind of evidence?" Federal investigators deal with whistleblower situations regularly. They're trained to recognize the difference between legitimate safety concerns and personal grievances. The senior inspector took my flash drive, connected it to his laptop, and began reviewing the contamination data while his colleagues expanded their examination beyond Derek's carefully prepared samples. The hidden contaminated batches were discovered within an hour. Derek's face went from pale to green when the inspectors found 15,000 implants with bacterial contamination levels that would have killed patients within weeks of surgery. His sales background couldn't explain away the scientific evidence on my flash drive. Sterling tried damage control, claiming I'd fabricated everything out of revenge. The lead inspector wasn't buying it. "Mr. Manning, can you explain why your sterilization logs show complete cycles, but the actual equipment data indicates these processes were terminated early?" Derek stammered something about computer glitches. "Computer glitches don't systematically reduce autoclave temperatures to save electricity costs. They don't dilute sterilization chemicals to stretch budgets." Derek had no answers because he'd never understood the science behind what he was falsifying. The FDA immediately halted the approval process and launched a criminal investigation. MedTech Solutions faced millions in fines and potential manslaughter charges. Derek was fired before lunch and faced personal liability for falsifying federal documents. Sterling's 20-year career ended with him being escorted out by security. My legal troubles, the federal whistleblower protection laws kicked in once the FDA confirmed my evidence. MedTech's threats evaporated when facing federal investigators who don't appreciate corporate intimidation tactics. Their lawyers suddenly had bigger problems than harassing former employees. Sarah called me that afternoon crying with relief. Her hospital had been scheduled to receive 2,000 of those contaminated implants for surgeries starting the next month. Hip replacements for grandparents, knee surgeries for weekend warriors, spinal implants for accident victims. All of them would have faced life-threatening infections. The recall affected 3 states and dozens of hospitals. Every contaminated device was tracked down and destroyed. The FDA implemented new oversight protocols based on my documentation of Derek's systematic falsification methods. Medical device companies nationwide had to prove their quality control systems couldn't be manipulated by unqualified personnel. 6 months later, I landed a position with Biomed Innovations, a competitor who valued integrity over fraternity connections. My new boss actually read my technical background before hiring me. Novel concept, right? The job paid better than MedTech ever had. Apparently, companies appreciate employees who put patient safety above personal comfort. Who knew? Derek never worked in medical devices again. Sterling landed at some startup where his corner-cutting mentality probably found new victims. But 50,000 potentially lethal implants never made it into operating rooms, and that math made everything worthwhile. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything you think you can't afford to lose. But staying silent costs things you can't afford to live with. The choice, when you really think about it, isn't that complicated after all.